All right, here it is, episode number 28 of The Grail. Welcome aboard. It is May 19th. And I am happy to say, and I am actually pretty surprised because I've been podcasting for years and always wonder if anybody's listening, but I got an email yesterday from Welp Magazine, which I have no idea who they are. But they sent me an article where they voted The Grail in the top 20 podcast of 2021. So holy shit, that's pretty cool. You once in a while you get a little notice. It feels good. I'm not going to lie. I'm like, is anybody listening? What is going on? I've got fucking good content. Tooting my own horn right here is what I'm doing. But to be honest, though, I am pretty happy because The Grail is my little side project that I consider just as cool as Let There Be Talk, if not cooler. The people on this show I consider heroes, and I mean that. They are the artists out there that are doing what they love. You want to get into somebody that does what he loves. Today's guest is Mr. Dennis Larkins. Now, let me tell you something. I've been podcasting 10 years. I'm 55. I've been alive for 55 years. That's what it means when you're 55, right? That you've been alive 55 years. Not necessarily, though, for some people. They may be alive, but they are not living. Back in 1978, and I have told this story a million times, and yes, I will tell it again, because it is my version of the I threw the winning touchdown, fourth quarter, with 2 seconds left, dude, in high school. Man, I did it. But I went to a concert in 79, Day in the Green, Oakland Coliseum, put on by Mr. Bill Graham. Coming out of 6th grade, into the summer, getting ready to be in junior high, walked into the stadium, and I saw a massive structure, which was the stage. And it looked like a humongous jungle, and immediately I was hooked. I was like, what is this? Day in the Greens are a huge part of my life. And they are probably the reason I'm alive. And I do not just throw that around out there because a person like me, I don't even know what kind of job I could possibly even have. I had no love for anything except the arts. And it all came from that day, stepping into the Coliseum. Cheap Trick, AC/DC, Journey, Blue Oyster Cult, Ted Nugent. Changed my life. Not just the music, but the art that was draped over the stage side speakers. And all of the art that was at the Day in the Greens. I was just as excited to see the stage as I was to see the bands. Every time I went to a Day in the Green, I would run through the tunnel and come out onto the field and look at the stage. Bam! Holy shit, there it is. Look at that thing. It's dinosaurs. Look at that. It's a spaceship. It's Boston. Don't look back, spaceship. It's a castle. It's a circus. It's a giant scorpion. These are some of the fucking memories I have of the artwork. And it was all done by my guest today, Mr. Dennis Larkins. And he is a hero to me. Not only is he an artist, but he is part of rock and roll history. And between Bill Graham and Dennis Larkins, they created some of the greatest set designs ever by hand. None of this digital shit that's done now on computers and everything. I'm talking about stuff hand painted on the ground, on the floors of Winterland or at an airport hangar, somewhere big enough to paint giant 80-foot scrims. I'm talking old school concert stuff. And the number one concert stage in my eyes is the Stonehenge Led Zeppelin set from 1977. I own a painting of that stage from Mr. Dennis Larkins that I bought probably almost 16, 17 years ago and is my prized possession. And one day I hope to own a house or an apartment, own something, and hang that thing. It's hung in every place I own, but hang somewhere in the middle of my Day in the Green museum. If I buy a place and I own it, I'm going to just have a Day in the Green museum in the house. It's just, that's what it's going to be. You're going to come in, there won't be anything else except Day in the Green shit. So I've been selling everything I have and just keep the Day in the Green shit and just have a theme. You got to have a theme if you're trying to go minimalist. Anyway, I thank all of you for listening to The Grail. It means the world to me. And also supporting Cactus Radio Network, my podcast network. You can find it all on cactusradionetwork.com. The Grail, Dark Fonzie, At Home with Byron Katie, and Let There Be Talk. Please subscribe on iTunes and leave reviews across the platforms. It really helps. And right now, let's sit back and enjoy some serious rock talk with Dennis Larkins. Oh, man, look who we have right here. Dennis Larkins.
Hey, Dean, this is our first meeting ever.
I know, we just conversed through email years ago.
Yeah, a couple phone calls.
Yeah, how long ago was that? Maybe
I don't know. Yours, a painting commission, I remember.
Yeah.
Still got that.
Oh, of course, dude. It ain't going nowhere. I want a second one.
Okay. What are we talking about today?
Well, you know my obsession with Bill Graham and the Day in the Greens and now the Grateful Dead. And of course, years ago, 1978, I walked into the Oakland Coliseum and I saw this incredible stage. And I was like, what is this? And I never forgot it and went to Day in the Greens over and over and over and wondered who painted these stages. And years ago, with the magic of computers, I dove down the rabbit hole because I'm obsessed with Day in the Greens, and I find your name. And of course, Baron Woolman being my friend.
Yeah, both of our friends.
Right.
Take a moment for the memory of Baron, who left us, unfortunately, this last year.
I love that man. I was so grateful to have him in my life. Through Baron and eventually doing some heavy research of stuff that I loved, I found out that you were the man that had painted these scrims on the stage. Now, Bill Graham had an idea of doing concerts in baseball fields, stadiums, but he didn't want it to just look like a plain old stadium. He thought, let's make it look like a Broadway kind of show or whatever, and comes up with this idea, from what I know, to have these themes of these shows. So there would be like Mount Rushmore or dinosaurs or Don't Look Back with Boston, a spaceship, or whatever it was. I want to get into the history of that.
Go into a little bit more detail about that evolution if you want.
Yes.
So when I first got involved with Bill was in the early 70s. And I had been an artist here in New Mexico, in northern New Mexico. We had a cabin on the Rio Grande near Taos. And I had my starving artist painting career, and which was going gangbusters. But then some personal situations developed, and we ended up bailing out of there, essentially for the summer, out to the Bay Area. I was just going to see what I could find for work to make a little bit of money, because it was the starving artist era after all. So we'd spent a little time out there, and my wife, her younger brother, who was just a kid at the time, worked as a roadie and a kind of an usher at Berkeley Rep for Bill Graham shows. And Bill used to have his office, 11th and Howard, used to have a little shop in the back, and it was called FM Productions. And they would do whatever construction. They actually, sometimes they did some serious stuff there. They did the wall of sound there. And, so they would make things. And at the same time, I had, just by luck, by coincidence, gotten a job at the San Francisco Opera Scenic Shop. And that was the job that was going to make me some money. So it was by hook and by crook. And literally, I had no experience whatsoever painting scenery for anybody. And therefore, I wasn't qualified. It was actually a union shop, same union as the movie scenic artists and so forth. But it was between seasons. It was February, March or something. And the charge man, which is the head scenic artist, took pity on me, basically, although he needed a little bit of help, but he didn't need a scenic artist because he had his union people, but he needed help kind of putting the place together to get ready for a big season coming up. So he hired me to come in and basically just help, kind of tidy things up and be his sort of go-to guy, taking care of business. And that put me in a position of answering the telephone. That was one of my jobs to do. So I'd been there about a week, and my young brother-in-law worked downtown in the shop for Bill. And he overheard his bosses talking about a backdrop that they needed to be painted for a show in a couple of weekends for War. And they had shopped it around in LA. There was no commercial scenic shop in San Francisco. So they had to go to LA, to the big shops in LA. And they came away with sticker shock, basically. It was just more money than they wanted to put into it. And essentially it was a album cover backdrop. And I can't remember which album for War, except to remember it was kind of a cartoon street scene, sort of simple, flat colors with black line cartoon. So he overheard them kind of scratching their heads and talking about it. And he poked his head in the door and he said, "Oh, my brother-in-law works out at the San Francisco Opera Scenic Shop. I bet he could help you." And that was one of those magic moments, And so they called me up, and so I've been there like a week, and I was, I don't know, sweeping the floor or whatever, but the phone rang, and I picked it up, and they said, "We've got this thing to do, and can you help us with it?" And I said, "Of course," and of course I what else would you say?
Yeah.
So I'd never painted a backdrop before, but I was an artist. I mean, a fairly accomplished one, and it was a great opportunity to show my boss what I could do. So I hired my boss, and I hired another one of the journeyman scenic artists, high-end guy, and I had the backdrop sewn up there at the shop. It was a full-service shop with construction and everything. And so the next weekend, actually just over the weekend, Saturday and Sunday, I hired these people to come help me, and we painted this thing up. And like I say, it was simple, and so it was relatively quick and easy. And it was a show and tell moment for me because I was leading the crew to do it. And then on Monday, the Bill Graham guy came, and I don't even recall whether I actually asked him how much, I mean, I just said yes, basically, but he came to pick up the backdrop, and he handed me an envelope of money, of cash.
Wow.
And I gave him the drop, and he didn't even look at it. He just took it away. And I opened up the envelope, and it was, whoa, a nice fat little pile of money. So I paid my guys union scale, time and a half. It was a weekend after all. And I doubled the money. And I thought, this is cool. This is a whole thing, And from that minute forward, I became Bill's go-to scenic guy. And so by day, sort of lowly worm in the opera scenic shop, by night, full-on rock and roll scenic contractor. So they would set me up at different venues between shows, like Winterland or Fillmore or whatever. And typically, it would be an album cover blow-up backdrop. So it's 20 feet or 25, 30 feet, whatever. And I'd have it sewn up at the opera shop, and they'd have a crew. The situation there in LA, in the big scenic shops, they have what's called a paint frame, which is this vertical thing that, you push a button and it'll go up and down, and you're working on what's called the paint floor. So you can make the backdrop move so that you don't have to move, and you can just be there and paint.
Right.
In San Francisco at the Opera Shop, it was done old school. I mean, really old school. And this was techniques that go back, forever. Basically, it's laid out on the floor and you're standing on top of it. And by that time, I was going to back up a little bit, because after I hired my boss to help me that weekend, I think the very next week, he gave me a pay raise and he hired somebody else to sweep the floor or whatever. And I got the job of mixing the paint for the scenic artists. It still wasn't a scenic artist position, and it wasn't still a union position, but it put me in a better spot to be able to I don't know, just make a pest out of myself and just tell them, hey, let me try that. Let me show you what I can do. But basically, I got to show them what I could do on the side. And they were a very snooty bunch, and they weren't paying much attention. But what they were paying attention to was that this guy is making something happen, and maybe he's making more money than we are. So anyway, I would do these backdrops and so forth, and sometimes pretty complicated stuff. Like I remember whatever the year was, 74, maybe something like that. I did a Blues for Allah. It was my first Grateful Dead thing. It was about a 25-foot backdrop, perfect copy of the Philip Garris album art, and a backdrop. And I guess that, as it turned out, that was some famous historic show that they did at, I can't remember the venue. But in any case, it was one thing after another, and it kind of built up. And at the same time, I hope you don't mind, the story goes on a little bit.
Oh, I love it.
At the same time, I mean, we were expatriates from New Mexico, and I was an artist. I had my painting career and so forth, and that's really what I wanted to do. This was just side work. This was just stuff that happened, except that it had blown up into this really big deal that no one else was doing. So, and I got that at the time. It was just we were like pining away to come home and so forth. But I ended up working at the San Francisco Scenic Shop for three seasons, and just worked my way up. It was a hierarchy. Very quickly, I had to join the union because they wanted me to help with the paint the scenery and so forth. So that was another promotion. But by the third season, I was actually one of the bosses. And but I'd also created this whole thing with Bill and as a scenic contractor. And I think that third season was also the year of the first time that we did a Day on the Green set. And so what year was that? Maybe 70, 75 or 6, something like that. And it was an all English show. It was like the British are coming or whatever. Yeah. And it was a castle.
Yeah, I know it. Yeah.
So I wasn't designing for Bill yet because I don't think he saw me that way. And Bill had this is the micro history of this thing. But Bill had a business relationship with Ice Follies because of Winterland. And Winterland was still an ice palace, and they would still do, ice shows there and rock and roll shows. And they were, a real entertainment organization, and that meant they had a design team and all of that. So one of the Ice Follies designers actually designed that first castle, but it was just a blueprint. So it was just a line drawing on blueprint. So they came to me naturally because I was their go-to scenic guy. So I hired some people, and I hired the shop, and it was a big deal because it was construction. If you know theatrical terms, they were stage flats, basically scrim, they were called, profiled scrim flats, because you would have the profile of the crenellations and the towers and all that kind of stuff, and the covering was scrim, which is a theatrical gauze. Now, what I don't know is who got the bright idea for Bill to do that, to even do this idea. But because they had done these dog shows, they call them dog shows.
Right.
They'd done these dog shows for a couple of seasons, basically just the structure. So you'd have these big platforms. The stage was 80 feet wide. You'd have these scaffold towers on each corner and a 40 by 80 foot roof. And then these platforms that would go out in each direction with all the sounds called sound stacks. Those are called sound wings. And they were all embedded in these big steel structures. So it was pretty cool looking all by itself. It's just that after a couple of years of that, I mean, people got tired of looking at all this junk, basically. And somebody in Bill's group got this bright idea that you could essentially do like a grill cover. And I guess they knew enough about gauze and scrim and stuff to know that a scrim would be the equivalent of a grill cover. And that meant that you had a surface, and that meant you had an opportunity for an image. So that was the original concept by whoever in Bill's office. But Bill had this idea about Day on the Green as this all-day open-air festival, which really sprung out of Woodstock. Wow. And that Woodstock changed everything, as you know. Yeah. And even though the stage and all of that at Woodstock was really just sort of bare minimum, and they were lucky that everything didn't fall down. But Bill was part of that, and it was an impressive thing. And that was where the origin story of Day on the Green. So by that, the timing was just perfect, and sort of literally being the right person in the right place at the right time. So since I'd already established myself as their go-to guy, we were into it a couple of seasons already, so it was natural that I would take care of them on this one too. But it was also the first time for me that I got an opportunity to show them what I could do, like with art direction and all of that, and hiring crews and just taking care of the business side of it as well as the art side. And so the day of the installation at the stadium, I was out there. They gave me all kinds of stuff to paint, in rock work to basically match up to the castle, and they wanted this and they wanted that. So it turned out to be a big job out there too. But then I got to be one of the crew and one of the team, and so there's always this bonding thing that happens, and so I was one of their guys. And then the next year, they did another version of it, and we added what's called I forget what it's called, but a back row, basically.
Oh, yeah.
Glass. So it became more dimensional. So it
3D.
It became more 3D. So it had a whole back row of a castle scene in addition to the original castle set on the front. So the other shows, I think, were basically just whatever they decorated them with. Those were the only sets we did for the first couple of years. And then by that time, I was really needing to get back to my painting career and all of that. So we made plans to come home, basically come back to the Rio Grande and all of that. And people were asking me to stick around, but I was adamant, and so I left. And I left it all behind. And the next year, they did a couple of shows. They did a big thing for the Who. The Who and the Dead. Maybe there was a Who show and a Who and the Dead. 2 different seasons, I think. I can't even remember all this stuff. If you go online, yep, there's a listing of all the dog shows and so forth that tells the years and who was in it and the line, all that stuff. So fast forward to 1977, and they had been very happy, with the work that the other people had done. One of my scenic artist colleagues at the opera, they'd had her do the first show of 1977, which was the Fleetwood Mac show. And she did a kind of a big forest sort of thing. Oh,
I know that one.
Yeah, which they didn't like very much. But in any case, I mean, it was fine. It was big scale and it was fine. But they basically begged me to do the next one. So literally from my little cabin on the banks of the Rio Grande, I designed the next show, which was Eagles Hotel California.
Oh.
So I remember I had my little AM radio and this little scratchy sound from trying to pick up the signal from all the way from Albuquerque, and I heard Hotel California for the very first time as I was designing the set, And essentially, I had their album cover, and I just had this idea of flipping the album cover. So I did a reverse repeat of the album cover and then created a sort of header across the top. It was simple, but it worked and it was effective. And then they flew me out. And by that time, they had a bigger shop with enough room that they were able to lay out all of the pieces of the set, sort of a piece at a time. And I painted it there, but that season, 1977, was the biggest Day on the Green season ever up to that point. So the big critical moment, though, was that the next show was going to be the 4th of July show. And I had one of the BGP guys, one of their managers, was sort of my handler, and he gave me an idea, a concept to draw up for that show, which I did, which was it was a medieval procession for whatever reason. So that's what I did, and did a beautiful rendering, and so Bill had this meeting, which was going to be a presentation, a show and tell. And there was me and some other artist I didn't know, and I don't remember who that was, and the Ice Follies people and their designer who had done the castle set. And so I was going in against these high-end, LA designers, basically. So we all met in Bill's office, and they had a whole presentation. And this is kind of early on stuff, but they had like a slide box thing, and they were prepared with this whole slideshow that they were going to do. And I brought in my stuff, and they had me tack it on the wall. And I think that their image was on the screen of the box, and it was a typical 4th of July Stars and Stripes kind of thing,
right?
A very Republican looking thing.
Yeah.
So even then, so and then whoever the other artist, and I apologize to history for not remembering. I can't remember what it was, but in any case, Bill looked at the stuff, and he went back behind his desk, and then he just sort of initiated things. And he said, this is all great. Everything looks great, and you're all really talented people and stuff. But this is not what I had in mind. And I already have an idea. So I don't know what got in my mind, but I had brought a large drawing pad with me and all the stuff to do it. And so Bill had one of his guys go get a travel log of some kind of, like a AAA book or something. And he opened it up, this tiny little postage stamp of a picture of Mount Rushmore.
Oh.
And then he reached in his pocket and he held the picture up, and he said, this is the set. And he got a quarter out and he stuck it in the middle, and he said, this is the stage. And at the exact same time that he did that, I got my pad out and I grabbed my chair and I pushed it right up to the front of his desk, slapped my pad down on his desk right in front of him, and started drawing. And I said, oh, you mean like this, like this, like this? And he said, yeah, exactly. He said, how soon can you have this? And I said, I can have it for you tomorrow.
Whoa.
End of meeting. So I felt really sorry for the Ice Follies people and stuff. They were blown out of the water right there and then. And that was the beginning of my design career in rock and roll.
So do you move back, or are you staying in New Mexico?
We were living in New Mexico. I was staying out there. Actually, I was staying with my young brother-in-law in his apartment. He had an extra room. And what that meant then was that I needed to be there for the summer.
Right.
And so the next call was to my wife, and, we just kind of got real about it. And she came out at a certain point, to spend some time out there too. But it was just, there were actually only the 2 shows left to do. It's a lot of work. And so the Mount Rushmore set, immediately, I came up with the drawing, and I knew enough in those days to do my drawing to scale, so that the drawing could also function as the actual design in scale, so you could build from it. And so I did the artwork and brought it back the next day, did an overnighter, I think. And it looked great, and Bill loved it. And so they started construction. and it was another scrim flat set. Well, actually, it wasn't, because they were complaining about that the scrim flats. The Forest before had been in that format, but the sound people really complained because of all the wood.
Yeah, right.
They don't like that. They hate that. So they needed something that they used to call sound translucent. So the scrim. So I came up with the design basically that you would have a complete scrim on both sides, and then you would do profiled flats for the edges, like the tops, heads in this case, and so forth. So if you see a picture of that set, you'll see a hard line going right across the tops of the president's head. That's the demarcation between the top of the scrim itself and the pipe where it's tied off, and then the scrim flat is just sitting on the pipe on the top. So that was the next level of technology that we did, and that was the first one, and the sound people were happy. And so that was the other thing too, is that I was essentially, even though a contractor, I was essentially in-house. So we could have those conversations, and they could tell me what they needed. I could tell them what I intended, and they could say, this works for us or this doesn't. That was kind of the beginning of that team, that went on through the 70s.
Now, once you get rolling, because Bill had the idea for Mount Rushmore, which was, I believe, Skynyrd and Peter Frampton. Am I right on that? I own the T-shirt on that. Yeah. Once you get rolling on that, are you experimenting with different thicknesses of the scrim as far as what's going to work up there, because you're dealing with wind and you're also dealing with sound coming through the speakers and durability and that kind of stuff?
Dean, this was all experimental at the time. Nobody knew. So the only thing that we could determine was a test with the sound engineers about the sound transparency part. So essentially, we were just using a kind of standard stage scrim, and I can't remember the weight. I know you can buy them in different weights. I don't know what the weight was, but somebody else came up with something, and it's like, will this work? And probably just pulled it out of a catalog or something, literally. And so that was the first order of business, was to make something that would make the sound guys go crazy or kill the whole design. And once we got past that, the rest of the questions, which we all had at the time, were unanswerable about durability. And it was not durable. This is very delicate stuff. So it was not uncommon for the scrim to get ripped. And then there's this woman, many people from that day would remember her. Carol Reed is her name. She's still with us. And she was an unbelievable rigger, basically, and lighting person and so forth. And she'd done a lot of Bill Graham stuff, and she was around and part of that scene. I remember seeing her literally on cables being lowered down in front of the scrim, like 50 feet up in the air with her needle and thread, tying up the hulls. I mean, this is heroic shit, man.
Scary shit, man.
Scary, but she was unbelievable. And for off and on over the years, she was also my seamstress. When we developed a company basically out of this that started in 78, because by the end of 77, it was non-viable to do this stuff in the venues anymore, because they were too big and it just took too much time and tended to trash the place. And as careful as I was,
And you were painting them for a lot of the time at Winterland on the floors in there.
Yeah. So there's my book. Did I send you a copy of my book?
Come on, man. It's my Bible. It's over here. So
there are pictures of the Zeppelin set on the floor at Winterland, and one of them with me on it. There it is.
Yeah. Hold on. Let me get.
You're showing a picture of me standing right on top one of the sound wings, and then the other picture is of that very one. And then above it on the top left is my original design.
Oh, you still got that picture?
You mean the actual art?
Yeah.
Oh, all that original art was left when I left FM. It was in their archives, and I have no idea, because FM doesn't exist anymore. So I actually have no idea what happened to that original art.
Damn.
So I took slides of it. I had the presence of mind to at least document it, you know. So I'll see about the Led Zeppelin show.
Yeah, let's get into that. I want to get into the Zeppelin because that's the painting you did for me, and it is one of the most iconic stages of all time, and it's also the last shows they ever did in the U.S. 1977. Right. 2 days after that, they never play the U.S. again because Bonzo dies in 80. When you hear Zeppelin's coming, what is the meeting and how does the design come? Because it is a Stonehenge design, and right. Later on, a lot of it was spoofed on Spinal Tap, and people thought it was from something else, but it was definitely from this.
The meeting was in Bill's office, and at that point, I'm definitely part of the group, and I'm the guy. So there's no like competition for who the designer is for this thing, but there is a competition for what is the idea for the show. And I wasn't part of the inner circle of the BGP management, so I wasn't sort of privy to their politics, but there was a lot of jockeying going on about who would be, kind of whose idea, would be favored, basically. And it was really all down to Bill. So this is just a, kind of a concept talking meeting. But what happened ultimately was, I'm trying to remember the fellow's name, and I can't at the moment bring it up, but a young English guy who worked for Bill, sitting right next to me, and he came up with this idea about Stonehenge. And it immediately clicked and everybody liked it, So made my job really super easy because, there's no confusion about what this thing's going to look like. For me, then I, did my research and so forth, and the Stonehenge at sunset and the silhouetting shapes and all that kind of stuff. All that sort of aesthetics of it was me, but the idea was this young English guy. And it's the only time that I know that he had the opportunity to step into that role. By the next year, by 78, I was teamed up with Peter Barsotti, who was one of Bill's main go-to guys and very creative person in his own right. And he'd been doing all of the kind of decorations, you might say, all the backstage stuff and whatever they did in addition to the set. And he had a lot of great ideas and had the ability to make it. He was a make it happen guy too, but his make it happen guy was to get a whole bunch of free teenagers out there and slap it all together and stuff, whatever. But so he was very, very good at that. But he was also politically in a really good position with Bill. And Peter and I had done something together in '77 for FM. There was a convention, I think, a music convention in San Diego at the Coronado. And there was a ballroom, and they had me do a little stage set that was sort of like a feature set for new groups and so forth. And the stage, the background was the Capitol Records Tower.
Oh, wow.
And so I designed it and painted it at FM. And then they flew me down there. And my seatmate on that flight was Peter Barsotti, and we met for the very first time, on that flight, and really hit it off. And I think that was probably, I don't know what happened, back in a back scene from that point to the next dog season, but Peter positioned himself somehow to be the creative guy for BGP.
Wow! So
they teamed him up with me, and so we were like the Lennon-McCartney of Day on the Green for all the rest of the 70s, all the way through.
Now, when Zeppelin shows up and sees the set, are you around at the time when the band's sound checking? Like, look at this.
Nope, I wasn't even part of their world yet. I had, other than my meetups with Bill in these meetings at BGP, I wasn't like day of show. I mean, they would give me tickets, so I watched the show from the audience.
Wow, really?
I didn't even have a backstage pass. So I really wasn't part of their scene, but I was the guy responsible for it happening. And that included, and this is probably another Peter, who knows who thought it up, but there was the big dirigible, that came up over the set for the intro for Led Zeppelin coming on stage. And that was somebody's idea that they interjected like very last minute. And I had to paint that after I got done with the stage set. Oh, by the way, would you, do this? And it was like 40-foot flat, basically reinforced thing that they got this gigantic boom crane that they had to park just upstage of the stage, and it was camouflaged off and everything, and so.
And that was the Zeppelin up there.
That was the Zeppelin. It was kind of a clunky thing to do, but the idea was there was a movie, was it the Black Sunday or something?
Oh, yeah, I know that. Yeah, where the Zeppelin comes over. Robert Shaw.
Yeah, that was that era. And that was the nexus of that concept. So as the group came on, this thing would come looming up over the thing. The crowd would go wild, it would wave around a little bit and, go away. So it was just a moment, a theatrical moment. And yet what it took to do just that moment, but it did represent that kind of pushed the envelope, theatricality, the tendency of Bill and his people. Peter was very much a cheerleader for all kinds of wild and crazy radical stuff to do. And, I don't need to remind you, but this was the origin of the outdoor rock and roll show.
Absolutely.
And the people doing it, of which, I had my role to play, and my role got bigger over the years, but this was collaborative art at its highest form, because it took literally armies of people at all kinds of levels to make this thing happen, not just the production and the stuff you see, but just the event itself and so forth. And the Bill Graham organization was at the height of their powers, basically, in those days. We weren't the only ones doing stage sets, but I think we were the only ones doing this in America. We were certainly the only ones doing anything that looked like this. And that's really because it was a unique opportunity for me to be the artist. So literally, I was the guy from the idea and the blank sheet of paper all the way through to the execution, installation, and show. So it was literally my personal art form blown up to this huge scale. And I had just literally the greatest mentor and patron of any artist, maybe in the history of art in that period of time. And Peter's role, Peter and I would collaborate on the concept, and often it would be his idea, or he'd have some ideas we'd bounce around. But whatever it was, I can't remember that next year there was a giant. The Boston was actually in '79.
Oh, that's right, '78. So '78, you got Dan the Green Five, The Jungle.
The Jungle. Well, there's a story there, but in any case, let's see.
You got the Stones' Birthday, Jaggermouth.
Yeah, that goes back to the other story I had started about the competing scenic shop, which was in England,
right? And
they did Rolling Stones and they did Pink Floyd. Oh. And so Bill actually commissioned that set as a present for Jagger and for the Stones, but it was designed and produced in England and brought over. I was a little offended.
So in '78, Dennis, you're still competing for gigs.
No, well, in that sense, it wasn't a competition. It was just, I guess, based on relationships, so whoever came to Bill with that idea would have had this other shop in mind and whatever, so I wasn't locked in yet, obviously. And that came to me, very graphically, when I learned that was happening, and I just put up with it, basically. And I was highly critical of that set. I didn't think it was very successful.
It was pretty cheap looking.
It was very cheap looking. It wasn't really well done. Great concept of the stage being the mouth and the thrust stage being the tongue. But I think we we would have done it a little bit better than that, I think.
How long did it take you guys to paint these? Did you paint them in a couple weeks? And where did they go after it? In the garbage?
In those days, it wasn't you guys, it was me. I was doing everything, including personally painting the shows.
I see it with the roller, you know?
Yeah, right. But in 78, they did start a bigger shop. And they did get a bigger shop kind of out in the Richmond area. But they didn't have a scenic shop. They had a big enough floor that I could do small things like backdrops and stuff. But they had to actually set me up in a separate warehouse building several miles away. It was really inconvenient, just all alone. They gave me one of the shop guys, who's a terrific person who turned into my longtime assistant. But in all fairness, it was my personal art form. So I really wasn't very anxious to give it away. And so I had my own process to go through in order to move from this sort of singular artist endeavor to a more collaborative, creative effort. But all of the early shows were all done personally because, and then even when I had people around me, I'd give them other things to do and I would go out and work on the big one, and just do it because it was me painting me.
Yeah. And how long would that take?
It wasn't so much how long it took. It was more like how long did we have?
Oh.
And it was pretty brutal. Typically, we'd do a concept meeting maybe on a Thursday, and they'd need the design. But, we had to have a concept by the end of that meeting, and then I would have a design on Friday, and for Bill's approval, and they'd start construction on Monday. So that same pattern from the Mount Rushmore meeting was maintained, and maybe even if I wasn't done completely, I needed to have enough done that they could start constructing like a drawing or something I could work off of. And then because Bill would have already sort of pre-approved things, and also there was a trust factor because I had about 1,000% home run record at that point, 0 failures at all, So there was a trust factor that once I said I would do something, I would do it, and I would do it on time, and I'd make it happen, and he didn't have to worry about it. In fact, Bill very quickly got out of that whole process because he trusted his team. And the time that you would see Bill, which was a whole other thing, which was kind of a high anxiety, high profile theatrical moment, that Bill had this, he was a bit of an existentialist in a way. He was a man of the moment, and he loved the rush of the moment. So I'm trying to think of maybe the first time I experienced that with him. I think it was probably was Mount Rushmore, where I was there, doing touch up and whatever needed to be done. In fact, I'd been there all night because the installation started the day before and went through the night to the day of show. So all that crew had been already on a 24-hour thing, and so everybody was already toast. Maybe mid to late morning before the day of show, whoever said that everything was ready, then they'd call Bill over his place in Mill Valley, and he'd come driving over, and he'd drive up to the back, and he and his group of people, he'd pick up his entourage on the way. And the set was always built up against the center field tunnel. And so the tunnel was the backstage. And so he'd come down the tunnel, under the set, out the fascia in the front, and he would walk all the way across the baseball field without ever turning back, all the way over to the opposing dugout. And then he'd turn around and he'd look at this thing, and it was in this moment. It was the moment, and that was what he wanted, and where the ultimate rush would happen, because what he was seeing was something that had never happened before.
Wow.
And I don't care how much you show somebody in a drawing or whatever, he never came to the shop ever to look and see things in production, in process. It was that existential moment, that rush of seeing it up And the interesting thing about that, Bill was very emotional, and actually, created issues sometimes with the level of emotion if it was negative with some people in situations. But he was also emotional in a positive kind of way too. But you would know that when he turned around, there'd be a noise, a big noise. And you hope that noise was a positive noise. And it happened every single show. And sometimes there was a secondary thing. Yeah, I love it, but but what about? Unfortunately, because of this existential moment that he would pick to come out, everything was already done. It would be an hour from showtime or something. There was no time to fix anything, change anything, whatever. So it was like, well, that's how it is, Bill.
Was there ever a time he turned around and he was like, no?
No.
Wow.
There is a story later on, probably 79, but I don't even know whether to tell it. But there was a disappointment. And I got to hear about it. But it was because of overload. And it was because of, my part of it was not checking, not making sure, not managing the managers, which I used to get in trouble with because situations would come up and I would get caught holding the bag because my part of the process was way downstream from like construction and other things and so forth that had already been done. And by the time I got things to paint, all of that. So I used to have problems that way, or the schedule where things would take longer than they were supposed to take. And so my schedule, my timeline would tighten up, but the workload didn't tighten up. So it would drive me crazy. So I used to kind of try to manage the managers, and I'd get in big trouble with that because I didn't like that at all. So this was a situation literally where I just decided to trust them, trust the process. And it was a big show at Spartan Stadium, San Jose State.
Yep.
And it was a big Greek set, like a Parthenon. And so the center stage with the peak ceiling, and then each sound wing, and the columns and all that. So, I did the job and it looked good and it went out the door and I went on. At that point in time, we had a full-on international production company, and it was literally around the clock and tours and, international stuff and national tours. And we had basically created a company that encouraged people to bring their work from the usual meccas like New York and Los Angeles, come all the way up to San Francisco and let us do it. So everybody was just burned out on overload and all that, but still functional, still making it happen. And so the set went out, the set looked great. But Bill shows up down at San Jose State, and they had built the sound wings 10 feet short on both sides. And they had just wrapped the set around the ends.
Oh, sloppy.
Looked like dog shit. I had no idea that happened. But that was a lack of coordination between the design and the people constructing the set, which was the same company, just down, a few doors down, and lack of coordination, lack of maybe project management, whatever. Really wasn't my job, but I was the one who got the call from Bill, and it was one of the very few times that he called me really upset. And I understood why he was so upset, and I was very upset. I won't tell you the analogy that he told me about his experience there, but that would have been a time that sound coming out of his mouth would not have been a positive sound. I was glad I wasn't there, but I hated getting that phone call. Yeah. And he almost never called me. So getting a call from Bill was not a good thing.
Oh, shit. At what point do you guys start collaborating with the artists? Let's as far as the stage, because the monsters where Nugent's got the fake boulders and you think they're real because the roadies brought them out and made it look real, or when Sammy Hagar comes out of the Trans Am on the side. When do you start collaborating?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure when this happened, but in the early years, it was all Bill. And that meant that it was Bill's checkbook. I wasn't part of the process by which Bill's checkbook gets emptied or filled in their process with their people, their clients, and all of that, because there are costs to be paid, and there are acts to be paid, and all of that, and there's money to be brought in. So, the business side of it, by which people get rich and people have jobs, all that kind of stuff. What do I know? I didn't know then. I don't know now. But I do know that at a certain point, Bill was putting some pressure on the acts themselves to chip in for the cost of all this decoration.
Wow.
Which every year, every show got more and more and more, and that was just, Bill was an impresario, and you one up yourself each time, and it becomes part of the design, issue. So I didn't know this was happening, but I did learn about this after the fact, because the story that I got was that at a certain point, Bill started getting pushback from these people about, well, if we're having to pay money for this shit, then shouldn't we have something to say about it?
Right.
Yeah. Hard to argue with that.
Yeah.
So it's at that point then that I start becoming some kind of ambassador, for the design. And it started out with just kind of copying people on things. But at a certain point, well, I guess Boston would have been a highlight, where I literally had to go get on an airplane, go down to Los Angeles, meet the group in their room at their hotel, make a presentation to them of the design to sell it to them before I can move forward with construction, with no time,
Wow.
like maybe a week or two.
So even in 79 is when bands are starting to pay for part of the artwork.
Yeah, I think they'd been paying for some time before then, probably with some grumbling, and but that's like sort of between managers and stuff,
Right.
But ultimately, it's coming out of somebody's profit, and probably the band, is taking a hit. I'm sure Bill's legendary, reputation and creative prowess preceded him, and people would go along with it, especially bands maybe starting out. It's like, okay, well, this is what it takes to ante into the game.
Yeah.
But if you're a high-end band and you're there as a headliner or something, and you're getting paid a lot of money, but you're being asked to kick back a bunch of money, then, and then there's egos involved. And well, here's a good example, and I will tell this story. And it was a phone call from Bill. In 1978, it was the show that was to headline Ted Nugent.
The Jungle. That's the first one I go to.
It wasn't the Jungle originally.
Oh.
And in fact, it was a rock and roll circus.
So there is a rock and roll circus later on, but 78 Nugent was going to be a circus?
Yeah, it was going to be a rock and roll circus. And this was an example where Peter and I, literally our level of collaboration was, we get together. Peter says, wow, wouldn't it be great to have a rock and roll circus? And of course, I think Stones had done their video, and that was probably the nexus of that concept. And then I went away and I did the design, which was straight out of Barnum and Bailey, and Bill loved it. So rock and roll circus, and that's what it was. And so I painted, we created, and I painted rock and roll circus, and it was literally a night and day thing. It was the crunch that was happening was that the sets were getting bigger, more complicated, the paint job, all that kind of stuff, and the timeline wasn't getting bigger. It was the same amount of time and much, much more work. So the crunch was at the labor end of it, and it was really literally a night and day grueling thing. And I think that I was just finishing up the second sound wing. I mean, this thing was about 3/4 done. The show was on Saturday. It was maybe Tuesday or Wednesday, and the phone rings in my shop, and it's Bill on the line from New York, and Bill's with Ted, and Bill's showing Ted the design for the first time. So that speaks to your question about approval, from the acts and so forth. And Ted Nugent went ape shit, and he hated it. And because, it's like, clowns, are you kidding me, man? Whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever the dialogue was, but along those lines. And then, so Ted said, it can't have clowns. And I said, well, it's a circus. And he said, well, couldn't it be something else? Like Ted would like attack dogs. And I said, well, design aside, putting attack dogs into a circus, I don't know. But even if it could be done, this is Tuesday, or this is Wednesday. The show's Saturday. I've already painted the show. I mean, we're coming down the backstretch here. There is no time to do a different set. He said, well, Ted has said if it's got clowns, he's not going on.
Wow.
Yeah. So there we were. And so I got together with Peter. We just stopped everything right there. And I got together with Peter. And Peter was a very creative guy, great concept guy. And so it was his concept, Rumble in the Jungle. So it became a decorator job, basically. And, I cleared out my scenic painting floor, put everything away, and designed a whole new header for the stage, Rumble in the Jungle, and probably a proscenium. I can't remember the design, but it wasn't more than just the proscenium. And we used some of the backdrops because the rock and roll circus, we had extended the stage all the way upstage and had all these like lions and tigers and different backdrops. Yeah, so we took the most generic of them, like the charging lion and the charging tiger, and so basically the junkyard dogs of the circus, and we used those for decoration, and I had two days at that point probably to paint these, but even the header and the what are called legs on the side, that was pushing it to even get that stuff done. Peter got his army of people together and spent a whole shitload of money to buy stuff.
The rope and stuff?
Yeah, all that stuff. So it became a shopping thing for him and an army of extras to decorate this thing, which he basically arm waved. At that point, I was a basket case. I mean, I did make it to the show, because that was part of my job to make sure everything goes up okay and whatever's needed. But I was also pretty pissed off about it too, because of lack of coordination, lack of any kind of understanding about the implications of what it was we were doing and the human toll that it would take, to try to do something else. So it was, the heroics, the backstage heroics on these kinds of things sometimes were just so over the top and really beyond kind of human, normal human ability or, any of that. And it just wasn't, ultimately that world in that time wasn't even really survivable. That's why it didn't continue at certain levels, just because it couldn't, or there would be such a turnover of people, it would change but evolution and change is a good thing too. But from a human standpoint, it was not very user friendly, you might say,
I absolutely love that one, man, because it was just a jungle. And to me, it had a voodoo vibe. It had kind of like...
Yeah, that was the concept.
Yeah.
But it was It was whatever Peter and his guys could come up with in town on the spur of the moment. Probably money was no object at that point. I mean, they were spending money like drunken sailors, I'm sure, because just the amount of coverage needed to cover all, I think they probably put up some black scrims as a background and then just draped things with the ropes and the stuff, Monsters of Rock then was the response to Ted killing the Rock and Roll Circus. But Rock and Roll Circus then was a stage that we were able to push over into the next season, and it became a journey show, right, which certainly was more appropriate and all of that. And I'd already painted, 75 or 80% of it. So it was relatively easy to finish it off. But Monsters of Rock was the very next weekend. So Rock and Roll Circus and Monsters of Rock were on succeeding weekends, and they were both 80-foot sets, 80-foot figures on those towers. I mean, the scale of them was unbelievable. Oh. So that was why we were able to pull off those two huge sets, just back to back in 79. 79 would have been the zenith of my time there. By 80, I was a wreck, and we were still trying to soldier on. And I did a big show for Journey, A Day on the Green, where the Sound Wings were basically their album cover, Kelly Mouse art and so forth. And also the Sound Wings were their touring set. So, and I had engineered the design of a whole new way of doing it, where, instead of needing big boom cranes and an overnighter and stuff to put up all this stuff, that essentially these were large scrims, that were on these hydraulic systems on the side. So they were like roll scrims that would go up and down. And so you just tie it off at the top and then just roll it down with a batten across the bottom, tie it off, stretch it, and you had the sides. And then we did a big complicated header piece, for the stage for Day on the Green. But that roll scrim idea they took on the road with them, and it was kind of revolutionary. So they were able to have, like out in the middle of Kansas or something, they were able to have a really nice looking stage set, that was easy to put up, easy to take down, and so that worked out. And I used that technology later for some other shows. And so, we kind of innovated as we went with the practicality part. Later, scrim got replaced by a plastic kind of scrim called textiline, which is sort of the kind of stuff that you see over greenhouses.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Sort of what air can go through it and so forth. The problem with textiline was that it's plastic, and the kind of paint that you needed to paint it was toxic, highly toxic. And so it had to be done with respirators and stuff.
Whoa,
I mean, just not viable,
Were you with the Day on the Greens all the way to the end, once the Motley Crue, the Metallicas and all that?
In 80 was sort of my last time with FM. I was their resident designer and the head of the scenic department, and we had built the company and done it a number of years and just built up this juggernaut of a production company. Bill had even sold the company to another person. It wasn't even, maybe he had a piece of it or something, but it wasn't his company technically anymore. And in fact, in that switch, sort of the human factor changed too. And also allegiances changed. So I wasn't feeling quite so loyal, under the circumstances. And after years of this night and day kind of stuff, I was a basket case. So at a certain point, I kind of pushed that envelope and lobbied for the work conditions to change and be more humane and all that kind of stuff, and basically got nowhere. And essentially, I left. I resigned. And that was the end of FM. It was not the end of Bill Graham for me, though. And that was the end of the dog season in 80. And then, of course, I was looking around for things to do. But the difficulty was that it was a tough breakup, like a bad breakup of a marriage, a difficult thing. And so there was some bad blood in both directions and so forth. And I felt used and abused and all of that. And yet I had a family to support and still needed to do things. So I was still looking for things to do. And I still had my basic creative relationships, starting with Bill, Peter, all those people at BGP, which was a different company than FM. So I continued on with BGP doing things. And in fact, it was that relationship that led to some other opportunities, like the posters.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah. Well, Peter came to me during that time, and he said, "Hey, you want to do a rock poster?" And I'd never done a rock poster, but I was open, and of course I was looking for work, and I said, "Sure." And he said, "Well, the Dead are doing a run at the Warfield."
Oh,
and
Dead set.
And they need a poster, and Peter was Bill's guy to the Grateful Dead. His background had been as a stage manager, and he'd stage managed lots of Dead shows and stuff. And it was like an inside thing. So Peter and I did what we did during that time, and we did a concept thing and just knocked some ideas around. And we had done something. Well, for years, we'd been doing the Grateful Dead New Year's shows.
Right.
It was a whole nother thing that every year had to top the last one and all that kind of stuff. But I think the year before was Peter and I had created these Grateful Dead characters for a New Year's Eve show. It was a male and female version of Uncle Sam, essentially. And so in my book, there's a picture from the FM shop, of the male version, the Uncle Sam version. He was basically a big theatrical profile flat. And he was about, 30 feet tall or whatever. The idea then was to use them in the poster to flank the theater as sort of like benevolent caretaker Grateful Dead figures, icons.
I loved them.
Yeah, so that was the concept. And so I immediately started making sketches and that kind of stuff. And then Peter did the presentation to the Dead. Something I was going to say about Peter and his role in our creative relationship, besides the brainstorming and all of that, was that one of the things that Peter was a make happen guy, so successful, was to actually make the work happen, to get the approvals. And for any creative person in any business, it's getting the job is the most important part. You can have all the greatest ideas in the world and be the most talented artist in the world. If the project doesn't happen, then it's all for nothing, basically. And Peter was the guy who made the project happen, whether it was to go into Bill and do a show and tell with him, and if he had to talk him into it or whatever, Peter was very persuasive. And he did the same with the Grateful Dead. And the Grateful Dead, I didn't know them really at the time as a group, but they were challenging, apparently, to get all of them to agree to the same thing. And so Peter, I'm not sure if it was hard for him. It probably wasn't. I think that this was a slam dunk, because he did the show and tell. I actually had 2 or 3 different ideas. They picked the one with Sam and Samantha in the building, flanking the building, and I had a week to do the post.
A week to do the post.
Rock and roll, right?
Which later became the album art, right?
Well, what happened? The Warfield series happened, and I was the go-to creative guy for that. I did everything for that. We used those original figures and we mounted them up on the building above the marquee. I made a backdrop that had the famous quote from Bill that used to be on the side of the building over at Winterland about the Grateful Dead. You're not the best at what you do. You're the only ones that do what you do. And I made a steal your face emblem for the marquee, the poster, the handbill. I even hand drew the newspaper ad for the Chronicle.
Wow.
Which was based on the design for the backdrop with the quote and everything, So And then during the run of the show, Peter had me backstage downstairs at Winterland, kind of cordoned off in this little corner, doing these pieces of scenery, basically, that were just copies of iconic Grateful Dead stuff, like Mouse and Griffin and this and that. And then they would use them for backdrops, behind the group at different nights of the run. So again, one man, it kind of went back to my roots from where I started, one man operation, just what do you need? And, how are we going to get it done? So that was a very successful thing. And then their next thing was to go to New York, to Radio City, to do a run there. And so they wanted a matching poster for the Warfield. And so design-wise, concept-wise, it was a little easier because we knew what it was going to be. It was going to be the figures with Radio City. And so I did up the drawing for it. Peter showed it to him, slam dunk, get another week, to do what I need to do, and got the job done. That led to the album cover, because the album cover is live recordings. Actually, there are two albums. Rick Griffin did an album cover of recordings from those same concerts.
The acoustic one.
Yeah, his Dead Reckoning, and mine's called Dead Set.
Right.
And for Dead Set, of course, I did that illustration with my Sam and Samantha figures over the Golden Gate Bridge overlooking the city, and then the sort of east meets west waterways concept of Manhattan, and the bridges and so forth on the backside. So
it's a masterpiece.
Thank you.
Now, two things. First of all, the scrims just right in the garbage when the shows were over?
No, they saved them. They used to be stored in the back of Bill's office, back in what used to be the shops, and they took up a lot of space, except for the later ones, because fairly early on, they got us to stop doing all that heavy construction. So they would just roll up mostly, except for the big headers and all that. But they still took up a lot of storage space. What year was it? Bill was an activist. And of course,
the fire.
The fire. Well, Bill and BGP supported or sponsored or whatever a big demonstration outside City Hall. Reagan had visited an SS cemetery in West Germany, and it caused a huge thing, especially with Jewish people and so forth. It's like, why would you do that? So there was a big demonstration. It was that night of the demonstration that the offices were firebombed and gutted, and all the sets went up.
Fuck.
So I don't know if that was 79 or whatever.
Right. I remember it completely. Yeah, it was like
the rest of it stuff after that I don't know. I do know, probably thrown away, because very little of it exists. I know that Bob Barsotti, Peter's brother, who also was a major executive at BGP, has told me that he has, I think, one or two of the backdrops of the charging lion or the charging tiger.
Oh yeah.
At a certain point after Bill died, they kind of soldiered on at BGP, and then it was sold to Clear Channel. And at a certain point after that, all of the major executives got a buyout. And so that was the end of that. And Bob said literally on his way out the back door, it was sticking out of a dumpster.
Oh.
And he grabbed it.
Wow, man. I mean, I've got the photos of every stage framed, and I got them, every one of them. Baron shot the photo of every stage. Mm-hmm. I got them all.
Baron didn't do the early ones, though.
No, he didn't do the early ones, but I've got photos from different people that shot them all. So right. they're all framed. Yeah. And I got them from an ex-employee there, and they're all framed in these old wood shitty frames.
Those were the ones that probably used to line the walls.
That's right. They lined the walls. So when you came into BGP, you would look at them, and I would see them forever. They're signed by Bill, and Bill Bill and Dan the Green is really the reason I'm alive, because without music and those shows, I would have just been some crazy lunatic. I don't know, music changed my life. And that whole way of presenting music changed my life of like, oh my God, and I never missed any of them. You grab the pink section, summer's here it is,
Right.
And then when I finally contacted you and found out that you were painting, you had done the Tattoo You tour for Bill 3D, and you said I could do a 3D of the Zeppelin for you. And when it showed up at my house, I almost cried, man. It was just, it's a masterpiece, man. And
it's a barren woman photograph. So it's a great photograph to start.
But how did you get an idea of doing 3D painting now? Because I want to let people know you did all this, but you are a painter and you sell paintings, and they're amazing paintings.
That's what I do now.
Right.
Yeah.
And they're incredible. So how did you get an idea to do 3D painting? Now, this painting is a painting of the Zeppelin show and the one that you did for Bill, and the people are like 3D on there, everything on it. Do you squirt foam on it and then paint it?
Oh, it's sculpted. But in this case, it's built up in layers, starting from the back to the front. And that means that the layers in the front are the deepest layers. And in a case like where it's a concert event, the figures would be among the deepest layers because they're in the foreground. So everything has to be 3D. If you're starting with the whole concept of 3D, you can't cheap out on it, so you got to go for it. But the idea of doing 3-dimensional paintings, it's called painted low relief. The concept of painted low relief is one of the oldest ideas in art, and goes all the way back, certainly to the ancient Greeks, arguably to the Egyptian tombs, and maybe before that. So the Greeks took it to a level of perfection where scholars now know that the marble friezes, like the Elgin marbles and stuff that we see in the beautiful Carrara marble, were actually very heavily and brightly painted, polychromed and so forth, and probably highly detailed. And the reason for that is that if you do something in 3 dimensions and then you give it a kind of a realistic paint job, it assumes the reality of you and me. I mean, actually, way beyond anything we're doing on Zoom, it's the reality of you in the same room with someone else. And so that it imbues life. And you can imagine with the ancient Greeks, they were doing their gods. And of course, they identified with their gods as fellow flawed human beings in that religion. And yet they were godlike and had the power of life and death. So if you're depicting them as a Greek artist and doing it in 3 dimensions with full-on paint jobs and stuff, you're literally creating a real thing there to relate to in a very real way. And from an aesthetic standpoint, even if it's low relief, which is sculpture, just that comes off the surface as opposed to full 3 dimensions, it's still picking up light, it's casting shadows, and it's operating in the real 3-dimensional world as we do. So there's a tendency just naturally to relate to it as real. So this is also a theatrical concept. And this is where I picked it up, was at the San Francisco Opera. And we were San Francisco is grand opera. We were doing things like for the Met that they would trade shows and this and that, and this is full scale, huge scale theatrics. A lot of the shows were fully dimensional, creating an entire 3-dimensional environment. So we were experimenting with materials like durable materials and so forth that stagehands who are notorious for wear and tear, could hopefully throw against the back wall and it would survive, or ride in a truck, across, from coast to coast, bouncing all the way and actually make the trip. And so we were trying to, in that kind of practical kind of way, but also experimenting with techniques and illusionary processes that from the audience standpoint, you'd look at that but even up close, it becomes more abstracted. But I was looking at it and I was saying, man, this shit is so cool. And wouldn't this be something to translate this onto one of my paintings, and just to see, it would make them just something else beyond just a painting, And so very early on, I started doing that, just experimenting with different kinds of materials on my own painting in my off hours. Not that I had very many in those days, but that's where the idea was. And I had gone out there with a full-on painting career here in New Mexico, painting in the landscape and so forth. And I don't know if you're familiar with northern New Mexico, but it's pretty dramatic. And the architecture and the light and the nature and all that kind of stuff. So fast forwarding to when I bailed out of rock and roll, a basket case in '81 after the Rolling Stones, I had a great studio here in town, and I wanted to revisit some of those images, but you can't unlearn things once you've gone somewhere. I mean, you're a different person. So I was a different artist than when I had left a decade before, and I was doing things in 3D. And so I just started working on the images here, except doing them like as little maquettes, as like little models and stage sets on the wall that would like literally come to life. And I was very interested in recreating effects, like time of day and the feeling of actually being somewhere, and maybe even the temperature and all that kind of stuff. Sort of working in some little photorealism and it was very theatrical. So the only different thing that changed in that part of my career was that because of rock and roll and because of having to sort of recreate myself, the changes that I had to go through, aside from as an artist and the sort of the physical technical stuff, flipped my whole orientation from an external orientation, like painting from the landscape, to an internal orientation of responding to things that were coming up within me, and then translating those into visuals. And that's what I still do today. So working in metaphor and symbol and all that kind of stuff. And then I basically, it was a radical shift, not in technique, but in sort of content, pictorial content. And then the other thing too was to sort of create story out of imagery that comes together in a kind of surrealistic sort of way. So the story becomes a kind of an open-ended narrative that is open to interpretation. In the case of your painting, it's not open to interpretation. That's an event that's from a photograph of a moment in time,
right,
that for you takes you back to that moment in time and relates more to that sense that I was doing of trying to recreate a moment and recreate the sense of that time and space. And so that's, your painting is part of that. But the things that I do are more about sort of inner space. And yeah.
What I love about it is it's a painting of the paintings that the guy did. So it's done by you of your original scrims.
Right. So it's me doing me.
Yeah.
And the only other painting you referred to was one that I had done of the '81 Stones Tattoo U tour, which was also me doing me, which Bill ended up with. That was in his living room for a long time, including the day he left us. So anyway, and the idea was the same, though. It was to recreate that moment and sense of that time and space.
Well, I got to tell you, my dream is to do a Dan the Green documentary, and it's going to happen one day. And I hope it happens sooner than later, but I would love to have you involved in the film just because you were so ground level. And I think without your art, and I know this 100%, it would be great to me and iconic, these concerts, but they wouldn't even come close to what they mean to me now. And my love of art, going into Robert Williams, Todd Shore, and Mark Ryden, and the
world that my paintings exist in now.
Right. So your artwork and my love of art really starts from that. That is the ground zero of my love of art, of the juxtaposed kind of world, of the lowbrow stuff and all that world. It all comes from you, man. And that is, as I get older, my love of architecture comes from being born and raised in Yosemite and mid-century. And my art comes from you and those concerts. And they're huge parts of me.
Ironically, at the same time, Robert Williams, was coming out of the psychedelic comic phase of his career and was working for Ed Big Daddy Roth,
right,
and doing all of his artwork and developing the foundation of what would come from that. And Robert even coined the term lowbrow, referring to his own art. But he was also referring to, I think, a kind of aesthetic sensibility of art forms that at that time, and maybe not even today, weren't accepted in the highbrow world of fine art. Although a lot of those barriers, thanks to people like Robert, have broken down. There was a time when I thought that I could get crossover from that part of my career back into the painting world, and they didn't want to hear about it, because for them it was just too confusing. It's like, oh, well, there's this artist and there's this artist, and what the hell, Right. So, but now that's not true, and at least in certain kinds of galleries, and it all started in L.A., in the LA Underground, of which I was.
And also R. Crumb. R. Crumb was a genius at it.
Yeah, Crumb. But and historically, we all come from Mad Magazine,
right,
basically, and Mad Magazine comes from EC Comics. But people like Kirby and Wood and Frazetta and all these people who started back then too. These are the pioneers of what has led to what we're talking about now. But it also, my dog shows were my version of Zap Comics, you might say. Crumb got an opportunity to create something that had never been done before, but you can tell in retrospect that he was so heavily influenced by what had come before, Mad and that whole world, that was such an essential creator of the psychedelic comics. But at the same time, where the rock artists, Kelly and Mouse and Griffin and Moscoso and all these people, and Robert, and we didn't necessarily know each other, but we were all working in the same, we were ingredients in the same stew, I guess, and expressing ourselves in our own kind of way. The thing that I'm the most grateful for, other than surviving that moment, and some people didn't, some people, but I did, and and I'm still here to talk about it, and I'm still creating in a strong way. But my most, the greatest gratitude I have is having been given the opportunity by a very visionary person. I mean, Bill Graham, even if he didn't know that he was a visionary, he was one. And Bill and I didn't spend a lot of time together, even though we were so closely linked. But Bill had an XKE that he used to drive around, a really beautiful little British racing green XKE, and that was his car. And I had an opportunity to ride in it from BGP out to the Oakland Stadium at one time. And so we had a chance to sort of chat. And Bill was sort of waxing on about how this incredible world that had been created, that he had started, but it was just blowing his mind. Well, let me back up just a little bit before I finish the story. Bill had been instrumental in, along with Chet Helms, of course, in the creation of the psychedelic posters. And for Bill, these were his earlier existential moments. He didn't want to know about how it was created or whatever. He just loved that moment when the artist came in and plopped it down on his desk. And it was like, whoa, kind of thing. And of course, he had some great people who also were the right people at the right place at the right time, creating something that has never happened before. So Day on the Green was his next phase. He had experienced something of his own burnout with the Fillmore East and all of that. And he had this vision that had come from Woodstock, but he hadn't got there yet. But it sort of took his own kind of personal crisis and kind of coming out of that to realize that this was his next opportunity to create. And there I was And I was the guy who could give him these existential moments. So what I said to him when he was really complimenting all the other people in his world, but what I said to him was that he was not only also an artist, he was also the artist. This was his creation, and that one of his great talents as part of his art form was his ability to bring together these teams of unbelievably talented, creative people. None of us really knew because we were inventing something as we went, and we brought to it what we had to bring to it. But mostly we were making it up as we went. But if we hadn't had someone like a Bill Graham who had the pockets to deal with it and the chutzpah to say yes, none of this would have happened. So that was the incredible part of it. And we invented an art form and just shit that never happened before that resonates. I mean, it's resonating now. You and I are talking about it, and you're not the only person in my world has told me basically what you've told me is that those moments and experiences change their life and influence the whole direction of their adult life.
That's
so
true.
Yeah, none of us intended it. It wasn't designed that way. It really wasn't even part of the deal. It was, we were just making it up, but we were all co-creating in the moment. All those tens of thousands of screaming people, teenagers, and whacked out, characters in the audience were as much a co-creator of that moment as the people physically doing it. And nobody knew. Part of my problem as an artist during that time was the anonymity of it, because my name wasn't on there. And there was no association other than a few individuals in the know. And I'll tell you one last story and then we can wrap this up. But the 81 Tattoo You Stones tour was my last sort of big hurrah.
Wow.
And it had come at the end of a process. I had left FM in the previous year, but I hadn't left Bill, and I was still Bill's designer and go-to guy. So Bill's people set me up with a scenic shop, and that scenic shop was Winterland. But it was like the derelict Winterland. It had been closed up for about 3 years, I think. It was literally falling to pieces. We were lucky that it didn't fall on top of us, But it was this huge cavernous space with a big floor with nobody to bother us or whatever. And so Bill wanted me to do the next dog season, And so I assembled my team of sort of kamikaze scenic artists who I had trained and put together at FM. George Meade, I don't know if you've known George Meade and others. And they had all been fired from FM after I left because it was like a clearing out, of the old crazies, to do it different. It's sort of a corporatization of FM at that point. So anyway, for that time, though, we created a little scenic shop, and it was this underground outlaw scenic shop. And I had found these little buttons at the Army surplus store, these little brass US buttons, and we each had one. I called it Uppity Scenic. And working through the BGP people, because I wasn't even talking to the FM people at that point. I was so pissed off, and I don't think they were happy with me either. But they were still sewing things up and getting things ready on my design and stuff, and they'd come over and they'd install things and go away. And so we'd have everything to paint. We did a journey tour, the escape tour there. And we did the first day on the green of the 81 season, which was Heart.
Oh yeah. Great one. Heart with Ozzy Osbourne.
The big rainbow and all that. So that was actually my last day on the green show. And I was just barely hanging on. But what happened? There was an event that happened where it all kind of came to a head, and Bill wanted us to make up, kiss and make up, and the bad blood was so, except we all worked for Bill, But at that point, I felt like I was being shoved back into something that was non-viable, and my world wasn't even particularly viable. It was just the trail end of an energy that had started a decade before, and this was what was left of it. And I was still trying to do it at the level that I'd been doing it, and doing it, but also trying to survive. And at that point, we were toying with the idea of just bailing again and going home, essentially. So the pressure was on, and they were just pushing on it and pushing on it, and so they set up a meeting. They wanted to set up a meeting where we would kiss and make up down at BGP, and by that time I just basically had it. The Stones tour wasn't happening. Earlier in the year, it was we were all excited about it. I'd actually done an indoor design that they didn't use. That would have been pretty incredible. It was a pyramid.
Whoa.
That was a three-dimensional projection screen, faceted projection screen, that for the entry it would hydraulically lift up to reveal the stage. Didn't get used, but so I'd done that design, and then the tour was off, and the Stones individually weren't, well, especially Mick and Keith apparently were at odds and weren't even, different parts of the world, and they were recording an album and weren't even in the same room together, and it was all being kind of electronically put together. So it didn't look, it wasn't enough for me to hang my hat on, and the pressure was on to get together with FM, and I was just so pissed off at them because they had literally, for me anyway, in my world, kind of thrown me to the wolves, and after all that. So this was just the interpersonal political stuff, and I understood it and everything, but just physically, emotionally, I was done.
Yeah.
So after the Heart show, then we had this meeting, and I just walked into the meeting, and before the meeting even started, I just sort of stood up and said, I know you're trying to resolve this split, and I know it's been tough. It's been tough for me, and I like all of you guys, and I appreciate everything, but I just can't do this anymore. So, it's all yours, and have at it, and I'll see you. And I just left, and that was it. And we packed up, and I think in a week, we were on the road for Santa Fe in a U-Haul truck, and we got back to Santa Fe, and 5 days later we moved into a house and didn't even have a phone yet. 5 days later, people were knocking on the door because Peter and people from BGP were trying to find me, and they were calling anybody in Santa Fe that they knew to try to find me, run me down, and call them back. And basically, the Stones tour was on. And I had to come back. So that's a whole nother story I won't get into now. But that turned out to be then, kind of the capstone of all that. And Bill was the promoter of that tour, which was the reason that they wanted me to be the guy. And he had basically sold the tour to Mick based on his portfolio, which was Day on the Green. And the story was that Mick looked at the portfolio and he said, "Yeah, I want one of those."
Wow. And that's how you did the 81.
Yeah.
It was pretty light though, the 81. It was simple, right? It was just the car and it
was not my art, as it turned out. It was Mick had Mick's a very creative guy. So he had got together with one of his favorite artists, this graphic designer named Kazoo. And Kazoo had done the album cover, I think, and he loved his stuff. It was very kind of simple graphic. And so he wanted a design based on Kazoo. So I collaborated with Kazoo when I went back out, and we sat down at Winterland looking at his images and stuff, kind of, collaging it together. He spoke zero English.
Wow.
we just did it based on point and, and nod.
Yeah.
And then I had the design drawn up with the FM draftsman that night. That was like a Saturday. on Monday we were working.
Wow.
So it was, and Kazoo gets the design credit. I mean, it was his images, but of course Kazoo knew nothing of doing these kinds of shows or anything. But it was a direct collaboration at that point with FM. It was kiss and make up time for the moment, and forever, because I had already moved on and there was nothing to hang on to at that point, no territory to defend or whatever. So in a way, it was actually a really good thing. But it was painted at Winterland with my crew of kamikaze scenic artists and uppity scenic, and FM took care of all the rest of it. And
they used that the whole tour.
Yeah. Oh, here was the last story. I get a roundabout to it, which had to do with the anonymity. And it was the last time I was out on the road, and it was with the show. We'd done, this is too long a story to get into, but I'd had to go back. We'd created 2 sets. One got destroyed. I had to go back and create another set that was an all-weather set. That debuted in San Diego on the tour, and so I was down there with it. And during the Stones were on stage, and I was backstage, just basically kind of hanging on, and sitting on the steps. And Bill came up the steps, and he sat down next to me. And he knew what I'd gone through and what had happened, and it was a disaster that ended up in victory, because it has to, kind of thing. And we did all survive it, and it all worked out in the end, but it was rough. And he said, all those people out there, and I don't know what that stadium holds, 30, 40,000, whatever it is. He said, this is what they're here for. And I said, yeah, I know. And he said, the irony is that we know what it took to get it here and what all this means. And yet on the marquee, it says Rolling Stones. And when the people, if on the marquee it said Bill Graham or Dennis Larkins, you wouldn't have a single person in this audience spend a dime to come to this place. Because what happens is that when they come through that door and they see this incredible edifice and expression of creativity and so forth, what comes out of their mouth is, man, those Stones really know how to put on a show.
That's so true.
Quality of it right there, So,
wow.
I'll end it with that.
Listen, man, I can't thank you enough for talking to me. And I hope to see you face to face one day.
Well, this is the story.
Yeah, this is. And I got to get the Monsters of Rock painting. I need to put it next to the Zeppelin one. Those are the 2 iconic, besides the Boston one, of course. But that's it for me, man. The Monsters of Rock. I've got the shirts. I've got the, the photos and everything. I need the painting. And
well, that's another discussion.
And you still selling the book here, Startling Art?
Well, it's available. I think it's still available on Amazon.
Okay. And then your website is DennisLarkins.com.
That's right. And I'm on Facebook and Instagram as well.
And he sells paintings, and you can commission him to paint stuff. He's unreal. Get a painting, but from a legend, man, from a rock and roll set design legend right there. And also an incredible painter. If you're in the lowbrow world, you're into UFOs, you're into landscaping, you're into all that landscape stuff, man, get a painting from this man.
If you're anywhere near Santa Fe, New Mexico, June 18th is the opening of my next show at a gallery called Keep Contemporary, a show out here. And I've got a bunch of new stuff, and it'll be a pretty outstanding event, I'm sure. Oh. And now that we're kind of coming out of COVID, enough for all of us to at least carefully get together, So wow. I'll stay at arm's length, but we can chat. So come into town if you're here.
That would be great. All right. Thank you for talking to me. Thank you so much. It means the world to me. You don't understand. Like I said, those words I said are real. They're from the heart, and I mean every bit of it. So thank you so much.
Well, and thanks for letting me tell a few tales.
Oh,
Tales from the crypt.
Yeah, I love the stories, man. I love it. It was like, oh man, just to hear that stuff. I'm obsessed with it. And my listeners know. They listen, they go, oh, here he comes with another day in the green talk. But if anybody has something that's monumental to them growing up that changed the path of their direction, they're going to talk about it.
Yeah. Well, you got to hear some stories nobody's ever heard before.
It's great, man.
Those should be in your thing.
Yeah.
Sooner is better than later, because some of these people may not be around that much longer.
I heard that, man. I heard that. Okay. Well, text me or call me about the painting. We'll get it together and rock and roll, buddy. Have a great week.
All right. Take care of yourself.
See you, man.
Hey, bye, Dean.
Later.